very warm welcome to the Understanding Users podcast, brought to you by Researchable UX. It's great to have you with me. I'm your host, Mike Green. I'm a freelance user research lead and digital consultant based in the UK. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be chatting to various digital experts who I've had the pleasure of working with in recent years. They're from various disciplines, including user research, UX design, development, and product management. And there'll even be a digital business owner or two. I'll be talking to them about how they came to be in their current roles, what they've learned along the way, and what advice they may have for others getting into the field. These are intended to be relaxed, informal chats with professionals who are keen to share their experiences. So sit back and enjoy. In this episode of Understanding Users, Nick talks about the incredible buoyancy of the current booming UX job market and the ever-growing demand for both product and service design roles. We discuss the dangers of being too purist in real-world UX projects and touch on some of the challenges posed by IR35 legislation. We also reminisce about conducting experiments to blow up magnesium in chemistry classes at school and their surprising parallels with UX portfolios. Finally, he plays my 3-card challenge to share his favourite UX tool, favourite technique, and a trend he sees in the future. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the episode. So my guest this time is Nick Grantham. Nick is Associate Director of Zebra People, a specialist digital and UX recruiter based in London. And he's also a friend and a neighbour of mine in our little village in rural northwest Essex. It's great to have you on the show, Nick.
Great to be here, Mike. Really great to be here. Thanks for asking.
So tell us, Nick, a little bit about kind of your role and about Zebra People, the kind of work you do and how you operate, the kind of clients you have.
Sure. So Zebra People are a digitally focused recruitment company. So we cover a range of roles from UX designers and service designers, etc., through to developers and UI designers. We've been around for about 15 or 18 years now, I think. I myself have been there for 3.5 years or so, but I've been in UX recruitment for about 13 and a half years now. One of the old dogs these days. We are a specialist agency, and UX is really one of our key areas, our strong areas. So I'm in charge of a few people there and some training. We're good crew. We're not the biggest, but we are quite sort of. I know people use that term family feel quite a lot, but we genuinely do have that sort of that feel about us and that sort of commitment to knowing our craft, so to speak, and knowing our sectors, and hopefully not going in the cowboy category that so many other recruiters are in.
And tell me a little bit about the kind of clients you have.
Yeah, we've got a really wide range. So we've got lots within the public sector. We've got government clients, like the Ministry of Justice, for example. I think I probably tried to tap you up about them a couple of times. Through to the startups, the fintechs, the big ones, the small ones, the ones backed by Russian oligarchs, and the other ones that are still working out someone's garage. Through to charities and big name brands. As well as agencies, digital agencies, ad agencies. So it really is a wide spread of clients that we work with, both on a contract and permanent basis.
And we're talking now in January 2022. I still can't believe it's the year 2022. What's the UX job market like at the moment?
It's bonkers, to be honest. I would say in 2000, I keep missing a year, but I think 2020 was probably one of our worst years for a while, because I think everyone just stopped. We'd have days where we'd have another client closing their doors, another client pausing the job hunt. Understandably, people go on furlough, including myself. And then going into, and then by the end of 2020, we're seeing resurgence in the market, and then by the time we went into 2020, it had absolutely boomed. We always knew that out of all the sectors to come back, digital was going to be one of them, but we probably didn't expect it to come back as strong as it did. So the supply and demand is hugely in the candidate's favour, and that remained throughout the whole of 2020, and then going into this year, it looks to be just the same. So it's a really it's a great time to be looking for a job. It's a harder time if you're a client looking for people to join you or even retain people, because people are getting approached left, right, and centre. Don't get me wrong, it's a better market to be a recruiter in compared to one which is very client driven. And you're constantly having to find new business compared to find candidates. But it's still not. It's still pretty tough. But last year was good, and this year will hopefully also be good. But it's very, very candidate driven at the moment.
And what particular kinds of skill sets and experiences are clients looking for in the candidates?
Well, it varies. I would say the mid to senior range is the most popular.
Right.
And so we're looking for someone who's very hands-on. I mean, I'd pretty much say any level aside from juniors, unfortunately, any level is in demand right now. But yeah, probably the most popular is that mid to senior, maybe mid to lead level, and that's where clients are looking for someone who can still be is still very hands-on with deliverables, whether they're a researcher, designer, what have you. Potentially some management or some leadership skill to be able to at least lead a project, if not lead a team. But most of all, have that autonomy. I think, especially where we've got so much more working from home going on, clients want that confidence to know that someone can be cracking on with things behind their screen at home just as much as they are in the office. And obviously, with a few more years under their belt or a bit more experience under their belt, I think clients can feel they have that confidence in order to allow that person to just do what they need to do. So autonomy, hands-on ability to lead on certain projects where needed, if not help lead a team or help mentor more junior members. And obviously, bring some expertise to the practice. And I think sometimes clients will look for more of a T-shaped type of profile where they've got a particular specialism but still able to touch on other areas. But I think a lot of that depends on the size of the team, the size of the client. Some of the bigger clients, some of the bigger teams, they don't need as much of a breadth of experience. They really need that specialism. Whereas perhaps a startup or just a smaller team will want someone who can wear a few different hats. But then again, I think sometimes that will depend on the maturity, let's say the UX maturity of that client as well.
And you say it's a very candidate-driven market, and you touched on a little bit there what clients are looking for. I'm interested, what are candidates looking for, and how's that kind of changed as a result of the pandemic?
So, from a candidate's point of view, I would say, obviously, cash is up there. I think with the how candidate-driven the market is, people know they can make potentially a significant amount more, be it in a contract role or in a new permanent position. So obviously, I think some of the expectations have risen quite a lot. Sometimes realistically, sometimes not realistically. But then also the working from home factor has been a big thing. Pre-COVID, if someone wanted to work a 5-day week but work 1 day from home, probably be okay. If it was more than that, there'd be a question mark. And now I would say it's more from the candidate's end. If they want to come in more than 1 or 2 days a week, that's a question mark for them to answer, because they've got the power now, and it means that they've got a wider spread of options available to them as well, because they don't have as much travel to think about. But equally, it means that recruiters and clients can also consider a wider pool of candidates, because there's more people open to potentially coming in 1 day a week, or even 1 day a month, or even fully remote, which is good news for them, and guys like myself as well. So remote working is obviously well up there, but in terms of I think if we look at an average sort of remote working setup and we look at sort of the average earnings, I would say past that, it's that product focus, which is probably a real driver for a lot of the candidates that I speak to. Really wanting to work on something that is seen and they can see tangible changes from, and not just doing sort of website optimization. But not many people, I guess, want to do that. But also being able to be part of something and see it develop, and not just be doing little bits here and bits of marketing stuff for websites and stuff. But really being able to be either be part of a brand, which is producing great work, or being part of something smaller but they've got a really great product or really great service. And then past that, I think it depends on where they are in their career. So perhaps someone more junior or more midweight might want to go somewhere where they've got a bigger team where they can really upskill and develop with. Whereas perhaps someone who's more on the other more at that sort of lead level, perhaps they want to go into a head of position and manage a team, or perhaps just go somewhere where they've got a lot more influence on what happens with the product and the direction of design.
That's really interesting. And you talked about kind of the importance of remote working and how kind of location agnostic working is kind of a benefit to candidates. What about the kind of international perspective? Are the candidates from overseas who are able to kind of apply for jobs in the UK working for UK based organizations?
It's a funny one, that one, because you would think that, especially with Brexit and the candidate short market we've got, you would think that there'd be a lot more clients who are open to sponsorship. But I'm still finding it's not hugely better than any other year. So there's still a massive preference for people who are UK based, even if it's fully remote. They would still like that person to be UK based, I guess, for occasions where they had a meeting or a workshop and they really wanted someone to come in just on that occasion. It might be once a quarter, but be open to that. And actually, you'd think that would be fine for European candidates as well. But there is a reluctance there to go down the sponsorship route. I guess there's some admin that goes with it, and some cost that goes with it. But I personally think it makes sense to open it up a little bit more. The cost isn't that huge compared to what you might have to pay for a UK based candidate, especially in today's market. But I think, I'm obviously only covering a smaller portion of clients, and most of our clients tend to be London based. So I guess, with people with some other clients who've got international teams, then perhaps that has opened up more. But I haven't seen it as much myself with clients that I'm dealing with.
Right. And the spectre, if I can call it that, of IR35 hangs over sort of contract roles, as we're all familiar with. For those who aren't familiar with IR35, kind of, could you just explain a little bit about what it is and how it kind of impacts the work you do and the kind of placement of candidates?
Sure, yeah. So it's a government legislation. You'll probably know more about this than I do, Mike. But government legislation that essentially makes it that much tougher to verify yourself as outside of the full-time employment status that company has. So I think that, just making sure that if you're genuinely an outside of IR35 contractor, that you are not working in a similar sort of everyday setup scenario compared to a full-time worker at that company, and also reaping the benefits of a much bigger tax break. It's a lot of the contracts have gone inside IR35 as a result, where those contractors are paying pretty much the same rate of tax as a permanent employee, because their work is deemed to be, or their work environment and setup is deemed to be almost identical to a permanent employee. So why should they get the tax break? If they Most of the time they still earn more because they're on a day rate compared to a salary. So the take home is typically more than what a full time employee would get on a permanent salary, but it's not as much as an outside IR35 contractor where they have a much bigger tax break. And yeah, so when it first rolled out, obviously it was rolled out in the public sector and then rolled out into the private sector. What was that, last year? I keep missing a year. And it was really bad timing with, in fact, 2 years ago. So it was really bad timing with COVID as well. And lots of jobs went inside R30, converted to inside R35. Lots of contractors went to permanent roles because the money difference wasn't so big there, and there were fewer roles around. I think around that time, there's a lot of sort of paranoia, I think, probably from clients not wanting to get stung by HMRC. So they just automatically dropped their contract roles and went straight to permanent hires. But I would say since last year, that has been making some big changes, and there's been a lot more outside of IR35 contracts coming through, to the point now where it's getting quite difficult to find people. I mean, it's difficult to find anyone for any job. Even the local Wetherspoons is struggling to find staff, let alone people for high tech roles. But yeah, it's the outside of IR35 contract market has made a real comeback, which has put a lot of strain on the inside market. But typically, there are still some which will, some clients where their contracts will always, I think, from here on for a good while be inside R35, i.e., a lot of the government contracts or some with the big corporates.
I think the phrase I've often seen is or heard is disguised employee, and that's what HMRC kind of are coming after, people who are, as you say, using the tax status of being a contractor to reap the benefits of that, but at the same time actually working essentially like employees.
Yeah.
But it's a sort of, it kind of, as you say, it hangs over the whole market, and if you get it wrong and HMRC think you've got it wrong, then
that's it. And I get that, and I agree with it. I think if they are a disguised employee, then they absolutely should be paying a high rate of tax. I myself as a permanent employee, so I have to pay that amount of tax, and I'm working just as hard. However, as a recruiter, it's a real pain in the ass because we have to get certain administrative things off the client before we can work a role, and the SDS checks, the status determination statements that the clients have to do via the government website, they can be a bit tricky. I know that people are working out loopholes or going via consultancies to get around it, but you'd be surprised. I've done a sort of few dummy runs myself, and you'd be surprised by how many scenarios still end up as inside R35 when in actual fact I don't think they should have done. So I think I agree with the concept, but I think there needs to be a bit more fine tuning to make it truly fair as to in terms of deeming what is truly inside and outside R35. But it's a complicated beast, I'm sure.
Yeah. And just going back to the kind of candidate-driven nature of the market. So in the course of this series, I've spoken to a service designer, a UX designer, a user researcher. I'm interested to know, kind of from your perspective, are there particular types of roles that are more in demand at the moment? Kind of things that clients are looking for, skill sets that clients are looking for?
That's an interesting. I would say, this product design title. I'd say that's really swept the nation the last 3, 4 years, maybe. And I feel like for a long while, we had, let's take the UX designer, and that was up there in the sort of things to be if you wanted to be a sort of digital designer, because a lot of UX designers got paid really well, or they got paid more than, let's say, a UI designer, and they perhaps went a bit more into or do go into more depth. And then there was this wave, and they still exist now. They still got their purposes of UX UI designers, and obviously these candidates, these designers, had a bit of a blend between the two profiles. Typically, they would come from a more visual background and have progressed into UI design status, and then they would probably get involved with utilizing a little bit more research and then sort of tagging on UX onto their CV and saying, right, well, I've done a bit of wireframing, I've done a bit of guerrilla research, therefore, I'm talking very generally here, obviously. Call myself a UI UX designer, and for a while, I feel like in the market, these were almost seen as the poor relation to a UX designer, and most UI UX designers or UX UI designers wanted to become a UX designer. Again, very generally speaking, and I feel like we sort of joked about this unicorn candidate and how it wasn't, they didn't exist, basically because you couldn't be a true expert by covering so many, wearing so many different hats. And I know myself, if someone came to me applying for a UX job, and they had all this UI work in their portfolio and UX UI mentioned on their CV, it would put me off. And now I find myself going back to candidates and saying, UX candidates, and say, right, tell me about your UI experience. Can you show some more in your portfolio? Tell me, about, where you've utilized that. And I feel that so the UX UI role is almost evolved into this product designer position, this sort of all singing, all dancing designer. And so unicorns do exist, it seems. And I think, obviously being a bit facetious here, but I think the levels of the ability will obviously depend on that that individual, and some probably can truly call themselves an end-to-end product designer, and truly can come in at discovery stages and facilitate research as well as use research, and then go on to do the design, the visual design work as well. Off the back of that, this is just my theory or recruitment ramblings. But off the back of that, I feel that user research has really gone up more. Whatever you might feel about product designers and UX UI designers, I feel like the silver lining is almost like that realization that user research is still this really important thing that is needed. And so the user research market, I think, has almost had a bit of a boost off the back of the product design market overtaking a number of UX design roles out there, if that makes sense. And then since COVID, it's all since COVID, I feel like service design has also witnessed a big growth due to the nature of how companies have had to sort of change and operate since COVID. So it's all had a bit of a boost, but I think the one that's probably gone down a bit is actually the UX design roles. There's still plenty out there, and if you are a UX designer, then do get in touch. I've still got loads, but in just comparison to this product design title that's out there now.
That's fascinating, and as a user researcher with my user research hat on, that warms my heart to hear the importance being placed on user research by organisations. Because I think what's interesting and challenging about this whole UX world is exactly some of the issues with terminology and nomenclature of role types, and as you say, kind of the roles have evolved over time. And sometimes I've seen jobs advertised that it's quite clear that perhaps the client or the kind of recruiting company doesn't really understand what it is they're recruiting for. People slap UX, UI, research, service design, product design because they're sort of sexy terms, but it's actually kind of, do you really understand what that involves?
That's it, and I think that's it. And I think someone who's in a hiring position, or if they're a recruiter who hasn't had the right training, if someone comes along and they're more UI focused or more visually focused, they're going to have a more not all the time, but they could generally have a more engaging and nice to look at portfolio, which could make that hiring person or recruiter feel like they are better, but just purely based on that. And this is a massive generalization, but sometimes when you've got the more analytical type of profile out there who can really get under the skin of thing and really do a deep level of research and know all these great UX methodologies, compared to someone who is much more creative, sometimes that type of personality, the creative personality, can come across a bit better in an interview scenario. Again, massive generalization, but with those two things and a client or a recruiter who's not UX mature and not really knowing what they're looking for or listening for, I could probably see how that more creative type of profile gets through to that final stage or gets through to that offer stage, compared to the more analytical type of persona whose portfolio is technically correct and it's got all the right methodologies in there, but it's not showing really high fidelity cool visuals, for example. So yeah, that's sort of my conspiracy theory, where I think lots of we've had years of UI designers who are calling themselves UX designers because of various different reasons, landing some of these big UX roles. And I've seen it myself, where I've spoken to some of these candidates. I thought, what, I don't think you're the right person, not put them forward. And then I've linked in with them and seen their job update, and lo and behold, they've become a UX designer. Sometimes the same client that I decided not to put them forward to, and it's just like, what the hell? So yeah.
You mentioned UX portfolios there, and I'm interested to know kind of what as a recruiter, kind of what your view is on the power of those, the benefits of those, and what are the kind of do's and don'ts for candidates or UX workers in general, in terms of kind of what to include or not to include, or how to frame it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an ongoing subject, and everyone bangs on about the process. And I know I've done articles and talks on this before, and it's always a thing. And yeah, indeed, it is the process. But I think if we turn it back a little bit, I remember, again, I've been doing UX recruitment now for 13 and a half years, and I remember when I first started, well, for a start, a lot of the UX designers now we were looking at information architects. When was the last time you saw a brief for an information architect? But yeah, lots of IAs, and a lot of the time, clients weren't even looking at portfolios. I don't think a lot of clients necessarily always knew what they were looking for. So I thought, right, that's the IA UX guy or girl or person. Let's get them in, and they can do the wireframing stuff over there, and then come to us. And then over the years, as I think more people have started to realise what they're looking for and the benefits of it, the portfolio has grown to the point now where even user researchers are creating portfolios. So I think depending on your skill set, that will depend on what to show in your portfolio. But the key thing, it is the process. Being able to show that start to finish. From low, from concepting stage through to low fidelity stuff, through to testing and research, through to high fidelity stuff and results and summary, but also the validation throughout, the reasoning throughout. So you've not just got this cookie cutter portfolio like so many of the online courses are known for. But you can put your own reasoning in there to say, right, this is the reason I did this because of X, Y, Z, and really prove that you know what you're talking about. I always say the CV should show where you work, and the portfolio should show how you work, and it's that how that will define what type of designer you are, for example, or what type of researcher you are. That's my opinion on it, and I often think of a scenario with portfolios or case studies. Thinking back to my school days, and if you've heard this anywhere else, they've nicked it from me. But in school, let's say you're in chemistry class, and you're gonna burn magnesium. I know in my school, in our exercise books, we'd have to write up the experiment. So we'd start off with an introduction. Today we're going to burn magnesium and find out X, Y, Z, and then a hypothesis. I think it's going to explode when it gets lit, and then a diagram of the apparatus, and then you'd have your results and your summary and the conclusion. And I often think if you have a similar sort of format to your portfolio, whether it's research, service design, following that sort of format where you can really talk the reader through your portfolio step by step, mix it up with some visuals and annotations so it's easily digestible and it's engaging. It's not just pages of text or pages of visuals with no context. So you're telling that story, you're walking the reader through. Then I feel like even if that person wasn't a head of UX or whatever, if they were just the cleaner who'd happen to go into that room and look through your portfolio, I feel that it should be done in such a way that that person, whoever they are, will understand what the problem was, how you solved it, and why you went about solving it in that way, and then what the result was.
I'm just smiling as you're talking, remembering that those classes of burning magnesium at school, and it was always very exciting, wasn't it? That particular bit of chemistry.
That's probably why I remember it. It's like one of the best experiments done. But yeah, that may be filling a balloon with hydrogen and lighting it.
But going back to what you were saying, I really like that kind of dichotomy, the kind of where you work as your CV and then kind of portfolio of how you work. And it's that thing, and I've talked about this with other guests on the show about kind of show you're working. It's kind of explain. And in the case of kind of delivering work to clients or stakeholders, it's showing how you got to where you got to. And it's the same, I guess, when you're selling yourself to potential clients or to potential.
So one analogy that I'll use, because I know you UX guys love analogies, was done by my director Ben Klarfeld at Zebra People, and I think we've got this mentioned on our website where he thinks of portfolios like a maths equation, and again harking back to our school days where you would get 1 point for showing the correct answer, but you'd get 2 points for showing the workings out. And again, I think that's a good one to keep in mind when doing a portfolio. I think some people can get too carried away with just putting image after image with no context, and it doesn't really tell the reader that much about them or the project. And some can put War and Peace on there, and I can just guarantee you it's not going to get read if it's just reams and reams of text. So yeah, mix it up a little bit, I think, and yeah, show the process and explain your reasons for it.
And you mentioned earlier how it's very much a kind of mid to senior weighted market at the moment. I'm interested for people coming into user experience or kind of more juniors in their roles, what kind of attributes and experience and skills do you think candidates should be looking to develop?
I think confidence, being able to, go into something and try and take the reins with it, but also not overconfidence to the point where you get cocky. I think that there'd have to be some humility there, and willingness to develop themselves and learn, which, to be fair, most people do. But I think being able to come in and, I'm not going to use hit the ground running because it's a really overused term, especially in recruitment. But come in and if you say you're a UX designer, you know your process, then come in and be able to really do that, and come in and handle the user research, know what to do with it, understand that there's different methodologies there. You might not necessarily know every single one, but that's why you're mid to senior level rather than lead or head of, and that's fine. Know how to sort of adapt to it and take on these new methodologies. And while still churning out, the wireframes and the prototypes and generating personas and go through these flows, all those core deliverables. But being able to work well with your team, and not just your immediate team, whether that's a big or small UX team, but perhaps working in a cross-functional team where you're dealing with developers and project managers and various different stakeholders. I think I think UX, especially sometimes where you are in a company, they perhaps don't have as much UX maturity as you might prefer. Um, if you are good at being able to explain things, and taking away all the UX jargon, and just be able to explain to, for example, a finance director, or if you work in an agency, one of your clients, and say, look, this is why we have to spend X amount of time and X amount of money doing research. Because the end result, we'll do this with the research, and this is going to be the end result, which is going to, add to your profit margin and do all these wonderful things for you. But if you're someone who gets too, what's the word, offended, or or confused, or throw your toys out the pram when things don't go, Jacob Nielsen's Bible way of doing things, it's a very hard pill for teams and clients to swallow sometimes. Because you might learn one way of doing things in a particular company or in a course or via a book, but it's quite rare that that textbook way of doing things will always come into light in a live project. So I think being able to be adaptable and still and pragmatic, that's the word I'm looking for. I think if you're someone who can say, right, guys, this is how we should do it, and this is why we should do it this way, and explain that in a way that doesn't rely on jargon, and it can sort of, it's easy for non UX folks to understand and digest and accept, and it takes a certain personality to be able to communicate that sometimes as well. But be pragmatic enough to be able to say, right, okay, when there really is only X amount of budget, or X amount of time, or X amount of resources to be able to do it, that perfect way of doing it. If you're someone who can then say, okay, well, let's just do the best we can. I'm going to flag these points, and if they can't be corrected, then we'll just do the best we can. And I think sometimes, especially in the contract world, I've had a lot, contractors who've been let go early because they've become quite prickly, or quite difficult to work with when things haven't gone in the exact way they should have gone, according to the UX Bible.
I think that's absolutely spot on, and yeah, as you say, adaptability and flexibility, and not being too purist about things, because with the best will in the world, you can put together a plan, but plans are aspirations as much as they are, certainly when they're created. Yeah,
Exactly.
and things change, and certainly, as you say, as contractors, we're not in a position to start throwing our weight around, in the sense that
Yeah, I mean, sometimes as contractors, perhaps you are paid to flag something, with your expertise, but then at the same time, you probably paid a little bit more to know when to just put your head down and crack on. But I think that, the purist point of view, that's great for LinkedIn posts, but sometimes in a real live work scenario, it's good to have that in your mind, but it can't always be done that way. Just, depending on who's paying the bills at the end of the day.
what about the future, Nick? Just thinking about, we've talked about how buoyant the UX market is at the moment, which is great, obviously, for all of us involved, and very encouraging. Over the next few years, how do you see the market developing? and how will that kind of impact the kind of work you do?
I personally think we'll see more service design roles. Again, just due to how companies have had to change and adapt since COVID. But I also feel like in some other countries, service design is bigger than it is here, and it's almost like, it's almost like seeing how UX has evolved. I feel like the same thing will happen with service design as more and more companies, omni-channel companies, especially start to realize the value in improving their service design and overall customer experience. I think UX will still be there. I think the product design title is going to keep going, and user research again keep growing. I guess one concern I have is with the amount of money being thrown around, or titles being thrown around people to either retain them in companies or to attract them. I do slightly worry about the future leadership within design and UX, where people are getting fast tracked into leadership positions, but perhaps haven't really had the time to earn their stripes. I just wonder how those leaders will fare, and how those teams who report to those leaders will fare in a few short years to come. Because I'm seeing it a lot at the moment where people are applying for roles, and they're telling me they want X amount of money, and I'm just thinking, God, where did you get that figure from? I did not expect them to tell me they're looking for 80k or 70k, and they've got 3 years experience. It won't be another year on, and they'll probably be working in a head off position. They've had like 4 years experience. So, and again, it's not always down to the years of experience, and it's to do with the quality of experience and the projects you've worked on. But you kind of get where I'm coming from. But I'm seeing it a lot. I'm seeing it happen quite a lot, and it kind of needs to happen in some cases because the market is so tight and so competitive. But it is something that stays in my head a little bit with all this sort of career fast tracking to either retain or attract the right people.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? As you say, yeah, it degrades the kind of market generally, or it risks having a negative impact if people are sort of pushed above their actual ability of level and experience.
That's it.
So
That's it. There's a lot of focus, and this will sound funny coming from a recruiter, but there's just perhaps too much focus on money and egos, and yeah, it's going to have that sort of um, dilution effects perhaps within the market. We've seen the market become massively saturated, haven't we? And I think with any, when something gets massively saturated, there's a certain amount of dilution that will happen as well. And yeah, some of the figures being thrown at some of the people in the market at the moment is a bit crazy. But I think some of that is actually at fault. From recruiters maybe as well. I can imagine if you're a midweight candidate and you're getting hammered with roles by recruiters, whether they be internal recruiters or external recruiters, and perhaps they're not specialists, and perhaps they've just seen that you've mentioned UX or product design or user research in your CV, or your LinkedIn profile, and they're hitting you with a lead level position, 20k more than what you're on at the moment. If guys like me probably wouldn't do that, hopefully wouldn't do that, but lots of other recruiters would. Then after you've been hammered, however many times a day, however many times a week, by all these roles that are paying 20k more than what you're on at the moment, and offering you really a good title. After a while, I probably wouldn't blame you for thinking, well, actually, maybe my market value is 20k more than what I'm on at the moment. Maybe I should be working in the lead position. So yeah, I think that also needs to improve, and probably contributes a little bit to some of the inflated expectations of some candidates in the market at the moment.
So, what should UX designers, researchers, service designers bear in mind when they're looking to change roles or progress, let's say, in their career?
Yeah, I would say, really think about what is important for you. Yeah, of course, the money's up there, but the saying I often use is take a job thinking of your next job, right? And Because these days, no one stays at their job until retirement, where they get their gold carriage clock at the end of it. This doesn't happen. I would say 2-3 years is probably considered a long time in digital these days. So you could go on to your next job, and I think, how is that the learning you get, the projects that you're going to be working on, the stuff that you're going to be able to put in your portfolio as a result of that? how you see, the name or the sort of description of work that you're going to be able to put in your CV, how is that going to affect getting that next job? And it might be that you take your next job and it's not your dream job, but you're doing it to get your dream job, if that makes sense. So yeah, really think about, what are you going to get from this next role, aside from, another day working from home, aside from, 5K added onto your salary or whatever it might be. That's all important stuff, don't get me wrong. But you're going to get that pretty much wherever you go, right? So past that, what are you going to get from this company? And don't be too swayed by a big name brand. I've seen plenty of people go in and work for big name brands, and it looks great on the CV, but actually the work they've been doing has been pretty sort of business as usual stuff. It hasn't been that groundbreaking because the brand hasn't really needed it, or they've got a much bigger team. Sometimes there's just as much value or more value going to work for a startup or a small team where you have a whole lot more influence on the product or the direction of design or research, and or it's with a small company but they've got a big team and you can really learn from them. And also worth bearing in mind, who are you going to be shoulder to shoulder with every day, or be it virtually or in person? Who are these people? Who are your peers going to be? Most of all, I I always say go with your gut. I feel like I've got a lot of sayings, but I do. People sort of sometimes think of your gut instinct as this sort of off the cuff thought, but I personally feel like your gut is made up of a lot of collective experience, and you should give it a lot more credit than some people do. So yeah, if it doesn't feel right, don't get hounded into it by a pushy recruiter or another few grand added onto the salary. Really think about it. If your gut isn't in it, then in this market, you don't even need to risk it.
Right. Last thing is the 3-card challenge, Nick. So I've got 3 cards here. I've got a heart, a spade, and a diamond. And on the back of each is a different. So one is a trend, one is a technique, and one is a tool. So I'm going to get you just to choose a card first.
I'm going to go with the spade.
Okay.
Please.
So the spade is technique.
Technique.
So tell me about a UX technique that you, let's say, applaud or you find particularly powerful, or that something that you think that candidates perhaps should practice.
Okay. Let's have a think. I'd probably go back to that sort of pragmatic attitude. To be honest with you, I think soft skills generally. I know it's been brought up by a few people, but soft skills can get a bit overlooked at times. And I think definitely worth bearing in mind from a hiring perspective, not just concentrating too much on years of experience, but, hire on the potential just as much as you might hire on the experience, obviously depending on the level to a degree as well. But yeah, having that ability to be pragmatic, to be flexible, whilst at the same time, still producing really, high quality work built, based on solid research or practice. Yeah, I've over the years I've spoken and met and placed lots of different types of people. Let's not just call them UX design and service design. Different types of people, right? And some of them are brilliant at what they do. They really know their stuff. But in certain scenarios, they can become quite awkward to work with quite quickly if things don't go their way. And I think sometimes that type of person, that type of practitioner, when they're a real, expert and they really know what to do, and they're just given carte blanche, free range to do things the way they want to do it, that person can be phenomenal. They could be brilliant at it. And you'll know this as well, Mike. Lots of times that scenario, it just doesn't happen. And I think sometimes if you've got all that knowledge and ability, and you can still be adaptable when need be and be sort of pragmatic when need be, yeah, for me that's a real solid. That's someone that I like. That for me, that's a regular person, especially if they're a contractor. Someone who I'll always keep on my sort of A team and be like, right, they're not too much of a grenade.
Beware ruffling feathers. Go on then, 2 more cards.
Diamond, please.
Diamond is
trend. Okay. Well, we talked before about the product design title, and how that's sort of taken over quite a lot what would have been UX design jobs before. I I think we'll probably see, or I have started seeing, some of those UX designers who have no interest or no ability in UI, and they might stay going looking at other UX design jobs, UX architect jobs, but I've seen quite a few going more down the research route, or going down the service design route, and sort of fulfilling their UX ambitions through those avenues. And it's almost like, again, sort of 10 years back, or less than that maybe, I remember you'd see UX UI designers wanting to become UX designers, and some UX designers having their noses put out of joint by all these newbies getting involved with their sector, and also some of the sort of scandalous things that might have been put on CVs for people to call themselves a UX designer because they might have done a wireframe, they might have done a bit of guerrilla research, whatever. But now I'm also finding a lot of UX designers and user researchers going into service design and calling themselves service designers because they worked on a project end to end. And so yeah, it's funny to see that trend now happening to a degree. Whereas once people were really doing their best to get into UX, and now I'm finding UXers doing their best to go into service design, and again, sort of using some of those tactics to validate themselves as a service designer, where in actual fact, yes, there is some service design elements to what they've done, but they are not a service, bona fide service designer. So that's perhaps an interesting one.
Okay, and then last one is a heart, and that is a tool. Now, whether that be a UX tool or a tool that you use day to day in your work, what would you pick?
For me, LinkedIn is my go-to. I'm hardly ever on the job boards. Well, I'm not on the job boards. LinkedIn is my tool of choice. LinkedIn, emails, and phone, obviously. From a UX's point of view, I guess I don't know if that's really me to answer that one, and it really varies as to, again, what type of UXer or designer you are, or researcher you are. I've obviously seen a big boom in all the different types of prototyping tools and apps and stuff to use. Again, back in the day, it was basically OmniGraph or Exure, and now obviously there's Sketch and Vision, and I can't remember the last time I saw OmniGraph mentioned on any briefs, but
first class from the past.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that's really increased, I think, hasn't it? The different tools that can be used by you guys. But for myself, yeah, LinkedIn, the phone, and emails, really. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know what some of you guys prefer in terms of a contact method. But again, I guess that will vary quite a lot per person.
Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much for giving your time to kind of share your wisdom of the UX job market and your own experiences. And yeah, lots of useful stuff to ponder there. And long may you keep busy and placing candidates and keeping clients happy.
And hopefully some of it was insightful to a degree, but I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Understanding Users podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, do please like or comment wherever you're listening, and feel free to share it more widely. Join me again next time when I'll be talking to Frances Maxwell from Skyscanner, who styles herself very deliberately as a human-centered software engineer. I can't wait to chat to her about that. Until then, stay safe and stay user-centered.